Ayan Malik walked into the little cafe like a man who owned time and expected it to bend. His suit was expensive, his watch was newer than most people's salaries, and his eyes scanned menus like they were problems to be solved. The bell above the door barely chimed before he sat, fingers already on his phone, an email half-typed and a calendar full. Around him, the cafe hummed with a gentleness he had not known he missed. The slow steam of milk, the clink of cups, the murmured laughter of regulars who treated the place like a living room. Sara took his order with a quiet kindness that felt borderline brave. She had a soft voice and a practiced smile, things she kept glued on through double shifts in a life that never seemed to give proper breaks. Her apron had a faint coffee stain near the pocket, and her shoes were scuffed at the toe. She moved carefully as if each step had weight. When she set down his espresso, he barely looked up. "Black," he said, curt and brisk. "No sugar, no distractions." He watched people the way some people watch the weather, with impatience and a need to control. A phone buzzed and he ignored it. A child dropped a spoon and giggled. Ayan's jaw tightened, that tiny degree people notice when someone believes etiquette is a currency. The cafe's owner, an older man with flour in his hair, shot Sara a worried glance when Ayan frowned at the speed of service. She gave a small apologetic smile and whispered, "I'm sorry for the wait, sir." He waved it away, more annoyance than apology required, then returned to his emails. Sara moved on, collecting plates, balancing more than dishes. A regular wave, the couple argued softly in a corner over a spilled sugar packet, and outside, rain had begun to chalk the pavement. The room smelled like baking and the kind of tea that makes older people sit down and tell stories. These walls had heard birthday wishes and quiet confessions. They had curled themselves around single parents, students with backpacks, men with briefcases like Ayan, and strangers who needed a minute. He didn't belong, and perhaps he knew it in the way he tightened his tie when a waiter smiled. Still, there was something about the hum of life that rooted him to the seat. A voice from the kitchen called a name. A woman laughed too loudly. A barista wiped a counter and hummed a song that slipped through the space between tables. Ayan's eyes flicked to the photograph on the wall of the cafe's opening day. A young couple and a child smiling with flour on their hands. He looked away quickly as if the picture had judged him. He sat alone, counting minutes until the next meeting began, and swallowed something heavy. Sara's shift was running long. The rain outside thickened, turning the windows into streaked glass paintings. Orders piled, the old coffee machine hissed like an impatient animal. And still she moved with that same practiced calm, only now her hands trembled slightly. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket again and again, but she couldn't answer. Her father's doctor had promised to call with updates. Every vibration felt like a small earthquake she wasn't allowed to look at. Ayan noticed, though he tried not to. The human details he usually filtered out kept slipping through. Her half-smile, the way she bit the inside of her cheek when she was nervous. He hated himself a little for notice. When his meal finally arrived, a simple sandwich and soup, he ate quickly, the way people eat when food is just another transaction. Sara refilled his glass once, whispered, "Thank you," and hurried off to the counter where the owner was shaking his head about invoices. When the time came for the bill, she slid it onto the table with both hands, still polite, still steady, but under the paper receipt was something folded, thin as breath. He didn't see it at first. He signed his name, reached for his wallet, and then the corner of that folded note caught his eye. Ink bled slightly through one edge. He unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was uneven, careful but rushed. "Thank you for coming today. I'm sorry if I was distracted. My dad's final chemo session is happening right now, and I can't be there. Please forgive any delay." He stared at the lines. Words blurred for a moment before focusing again. The spoon in his cup clinked softly as it trembled against porcelain. He looked around the cafe. The worn walls, the flowers in chipped vases, the tired girl still smiling at another customer. The noise dulled. Time slowed into a heavy silence only he seemed to feel. Something in his chest shifted. He folded the note back with care like it was made of glass. Then he stood, pulled cash from his wallet and paused. For the first time that day, his phone stayed dark in his hand. He exhaled long and low and looked toward the counter where Sara stood, unaware that her quiet honesty had just cracked open the walls around a stranger's heart. Ayan stepped outside into the rain, the kind that soaked through suits and stripped away the sharpness of pride. He stood under the cafe's awning, holding that note like it might dissolve if he blinked too long. Cars passed, lights smeared across wet roads, and his reflection in a puddle looked older than he remembered. For a long moment he didn't move. The world around him felt too soft, too human, too far from the boardrooms and marble floors he called home. He started walking, but every step felt like walking backward in time. The smell of coffee had followed him out, and with it came something else, memory. A wooden stall, 20 years ago, his mother's voice calling his name. The image hit him so clearly he almost stopped in the street. She had worn the same tired smile Sara had, the one that carried exhaustion and love in the same breath. She used to work at a roadside tea stand after his father died, pouring chai for strangers who never looked her in the eye. He had hated that stall, hated seeing her hands red from the heat, hated how she'd always say, "It's okay, Ayan. Kindness always finds its way home." He had forgotten that line. Forgotten it for years. That day long ago, a stranger in a gray coat had come by, ordered tea, left a tip big enough to pay Ayan's school fees. His mother cried quietly while stirring the next cup. That man never knew what he'd changed. And now, standing under the same kind of rain, Ayan realized he'd become everything that man was not, closed, hurried, rich, but hollow. He turned back toward the cafe. Inside, Sara was cleaning tables, humming faintly, the tired kind of hum people use to hold themselves together. When the bell rang again, she looked up, startled. The rich man who'd walked out minutes ago stood there, his hair damp, his tie loose, eyes softer. He walked toward her without a word. Then he placed an envelope under the receipt holder on the counter. "For your father," he said quietly. Tell him someone's rooting for him." Sara blinked, confused. "Sir, I can't." But he was already smiling, a small human smile, not the polished kind that fits into meetings. "You already did more than you know," he said. Then he nodded to the owner, thanked him for the meal, the first thank you he'd said in months, and turned to leave. When the door closed, Sara looked down at the envelope, unsure what to do. Her coworker urged her to open it. She hesitated, biting her lip, heart beating too fast. Something told her that whatever was inside would change everything. The cafe had grown quiet. Even the coffee machine seemed to pause. Sara's hands shook as she tore the seal open, unaware that outside Ayan Malik had stopped on the curb and finally, quietly exhaled the guilt he'd carried for years. Sara's fingers trembled as she pulled the folded papers from the envelope. Inside was a check, and for a moment she thought it had to be a mistake. 1,000,000 rupees. Her breath caught, her knees weakened. Tucked behind it was a short handwritten note, the ink still fresh. "Your strength reminded me where I came from. Never lose that light." She pressed a hand to her mouth, tears breaking loose. The cafe owner came closer, reading over her shoulder. "Sara, do you know who that was?" he whispered. She shook her head. "He's Ayan Malik, the CEO of Malik Enterprises. He owns half the buildings on this street." The room fell silent. Every customer turned to look, and for a heartbeat, no one spoke. Sara didn't feel awe, only a soft confusion. She whispered, "Why me?" The owner smiled sadly. "Maybe because you smiled at him when nobody else did?" That night she called her father from the hospital. He cried when she told him. "There are still angels among men," he said. She laughed through tears. For the first time in months, she let herself believe tomorrow might be kind. Days passed. Then one afternoon, a car stopped outside the hospital. Ayan stepped out quietly, no cameras, no bodyguards. He carried flowers, not expensive ones, just marigolds, like the ones his mother used to love. When he walked into the ward, Sara froze. Her father smiled weakly from the bed and whispered, "You came back, sir." Ayan blinked. "You remember me?" "Of course," the old man said softly. "I used to mop the floors of your first office. You once gave me your lunch when no one else noticed." The memory struck Ayan like sunlight after years of fog. He smiled, eyes wet. Then maybe kindness really does find its way home. As he left the hospital, the sun broke through the clouds. The city didn't look different, but he did. For once, his pockets were full, but his heart felt fuller. A narrator's voice fades in. He entered the cafe rich in money, but left rich in heart. The camera lingers on the door closing behind him. The sound of a bell, the whisper of a note, and a man finally remembering what it means to be human.